Hi again, everybody. Matt's here, and today I would like to explain about the next time that I went to Maine in the summertime, continuing with the year 1989. Now, if you remember last time I was doing a blog post, I showed you my book, My Beach Adventure, and it showed a good deal of examples on what a typical day at the beach would be, especially at Wells Beach for me. But now that it is the summer coming up, I want to explain to you a little bit about what happened later on. Now, the first thing I want to mention is some of the reasons why we didn't go on vacations in June or July most of the time was because both my mother and father worked at Wellesley College for the summer curricular program for a few students who went to the science building at Wellesley College. In 1989, though, there were 6 students there whom I thought were the greatest people that I've ever met for the college program. And that one evening that my parents went out, they sat around our place in Burlington and they babysat me. And later on that summer, one or two of the members of the program introduced us to members of the family, and they took us on a nice trip at Hampton Harbor, New Hampshire, on board their cabin cruiser. So I got to experience what it was like on the water, wearing a vest, and being inside a tiny cabin. But later on in the summer, in addition to having our regular summers at Beach Acres, where we had our routine mornings with my father, going to the Boardwalk Arcade and biking and swimming, was our second trip to Nova Scotia. Only this time we planned it out in advance more carefully, and we started off by taking an overnight ferry from Portland, Maine, all the way to Yarmouth, Nova Scotia. And then for about a week and a half, we stayed every night at one different spot around the area, traveling across that part of Canada into Cape Breton, where they have the Cabot Trail, the mountains, and the whale watching cruises. Plus, I can remember towns like Inverness. And then we went for the first time, to the largest city around Nova Scotia, Halifax. And there was this lovely place called the Prince George Hotel, which ended up being one of our favorites for future trips to Nova Scotia. But in addition, when we were on our way back to Portland, Maine, after we spent some time, it took a few hours to adjust to the time zones, and we had to get on that ferry boat early. We went into the cabin, and that's where we napped. And I usually did not like to take naps during the daytime back then, but I kind of like to do it now so I can get a little bit of energy into the evening. So that was 1989, that summer. And of course, I was back at Fox Hill School for another year of lab kindergarten. After that, though, 1990 was where, during our summer we had in Maine at the time, one member of my dad's side of the family from California came to visit us, and her name is Shannon Blackowl. And she lived in the southern part of California in the desert, which was inaccessible to Las Vegas. So, despite having a guest for a few weeks at our place, she did not quite fit in as well as with a family as most of my other members did. But I can tell you one thing about when I was spending time alone with my grandmother. By 1990, she and my grandfather, Stanley Leroy Smith, was divorced, and my grandpa moved to California to live for the rest of his life. So in our house, we didn't have quite as many distractions or bad talk from him, which was kind of somewhat because he was still recovering as a World War II veteran. So if you ever run across people like that, then you see what I mean and how they really feel with PTSD. But when I went on this one weekend with my grandmother, which kind of been a routine if Grandma and I went to Maine overnight by ourselves, we'd have probably lunch or dinner at Burger King or McDonald's. And in the morning when we wake up, I think our grocery store, which is now Shop and Save by 1990, that was where we would get maybe one or two donuts and chocolate milk and coffee. And we just go right down to the end of Mile Road to Wells Beach to have a little picnic for breakfast. And yes, when Shannon was with visiting us, she came with my grandmother and I that one weekend. And weekends like those, when I was getting looked over, like I said, I was not having as good adjustment to Shannon because of me constantly kind of bothering her a little bit because I was 6 years old. So there's been a lot of things that have gone downhill for her since then. And I thought maybe after her visit, then she would somewhat forget about our times and stuff. But that was only until a couple of times when she'd wish me a happy birthday on Facebook. So I know that she was still around and she still thought about me. And trust me, when I'm around people who do shush a lot and don't like you to talk to them, that is kind of a thing that kind of makes me feel left out. So if I meet any of you who are watching on Facebook or YouTube right now, just remember that. And then by 1990, I think I do remember by then I was having a VCR and the television on the porch of our trailer. My two favorite VHS tapes were an episode of Master Chefs from New York featuring Lawrence Farjon, who was the owner of this restaurant called An American Place, who was fixing up a four-course entree that we could prepare step by step at home if we ever got the chance to do that. But anyway, learning from him, I know how to cook steak and I know how to make luscious soups. And taking it from his method, you want to let the liquids come to a boil and then you lower the heat and then try to skim the surface and try to reduce the sauce, maybe to a consistency of a thicker liquid or syrup before you add your final ingredient. And then, of course, when the dinner is done, there is a nice dessert that we tried one time called an apple pan downy. Not our favorite dessert, but it gave us a nice glance of what you can do with apples if you use them like apple pie or cobbler or something like that. Now, the other VHS tape that was my favorite at the time was Disney's Little Mermaid. And as you can see behind me, where I'm filming right now, there's a can that has Ariel on it. Let me show it to you. Now, this can right here, before anything else, is what I got for Janine last Christmas because she wanted a nice replica of this figure, which I thought was real soda. But this can actually be one example of some other characters like anime or manga or something like that that comes in a can like this. At first you think it's real soda, but you pop it up and it's just a figure like this. And this is a classic Ariel because she has in her hand right there a fork, which she mistakenly uses as a hairbrush because Scuttle says that is a dingle hopper. and it's used for plugging your hair. It's a funny scene from that movie, but there are many other reasons why that Little Mermaid was one of my favorite things to watch at 6 years old. And like many say on the theater reviews, it is a start of the Disney Renaissance collection that runs all the way through the 1990s, eventually finishing up with Tarzan, the movie. But for the creators who made this lovable Disney princess, believe me, after I watched it the first time, God, I just almost could fall in love immediately and start to wonder, God, where can I ever find a more gorgeous person than this? But nowadays, of course, that we have many more Disney things, and Little Mermaid has also been made into a sequel called Return to the Sea, and also a prequel, Ariel's Beginning, which tells the story of her mother and why it's a kind of a connection, as some say, to Peter Pan. But that would be another one of the Disney VHS tapes that I would get later in the year 1990. So if you want to look for one of these figurines, you could do that either at a Newbury Comics or where I got it in Nashua, New Hampshire at FYE. And then you can look for DVDs that are hard to find. They're still remaining. I'm sure you'll find Little Mermaid, the original, on DVD there at some point. So that's all I have to really say for now, and I hope you've had the time to observe. And let me tell you, as we move into the 1990s in my life right now, and of course, after the summer 1990, I would begin first grade at a new elementary school, and from then on, I would be with a group of friends all the way to the class of 2002. So have a good day, everybody, and be safe, and hope your beginning of spring is as grand as ever.